Hello, my name is Paige Tompkins, and I'm the Executive Director of the Upper Valley Educators Institute. I'm here today in the home of Barbara Barnes, who's a board member emeritus and the founding director of the Upper Valley Educators Institute. Barbara, thank you for having us.
Oh, it's nice to see you. Thank you for coming, Paige.
I'm really looking forward to this. We're going to have a good conversation about the Upper Valley Educator Institute, past and present. Let's launch in. Tell me about the beginning. How did UVEI get started? Who was involved?
Well, that's an interesting question because it sort of evolved. First of all, it's important to know when it started in the 1960s because, as you remember, that was the post-Sputnik period. And that is important because it was a time when the whole country began getting concerned about the educational system. The fact that the Russians had sent up the Sputnik before America got into that and before we'd started talking about it. First they got concerned about not enough science and math and the STEM subjects in the school, and I was involved in at that time in helping Norwich speak to that issue, and had been working with two Dartmouth professors to improve the science teaching in Norwich. So I had been doing that and was sort of involved with working with teachers. And then the federal government decided that we were really facing not only a shortage of teachers of science and math, but also teachers in general. And so the federal government started really encouraging more people to go into education and made money available to support teacher education. So in general, that's how I had been working with the science program, and that sort of phased into teachers in general.
So you were a teacher at the Norwich School at the time?
I had been teaching there for essentially 4 years. I started in 1960 working with these two Dartmouth professors, Leonard Reeser and Bill Ballard, and because they were parents of Norwich students, and they were very concerned about the fact that their particular children had only gotten science in a textbook, and they felt, and I couldn't have agreed more, that textbook science when you're young, means virtually nothing.
That's quite a project for a working teacher to take on. Tell me a little bit about your professional career that brought you to that point.
Well, I hadn't had a lot of teaching experience. I'd had essentially 2 years. First year was an independent school in the Boston area, and then I went from there to teaching in a one-room schoolhouse on the western side of Vermont. My husband at that time this was just post World War II. We're talking about a long time ago, Paige. And he'd gone in the Army early during World War II and hadn't finished college, so he had to finish college and went back to Middlebury, and I got a job teaching in a one-room schoolhouse in Weybridge and loved it, and always loved it so much that I really wanted to end my teaching career in a one-room schoolhouse someplace. But we started a family instead, so I only did it 1 year. And then I felt I was a stay-at-home mom when my children were preschool. And when the youngest one was ready for kindergarten, it was time for mom to go back to work. And because at one time, before I committed myself to being a teacher, I was pre-med. And I had a lot of, the superintendent saw all these science courses on my transcript, and knew that these two parents in Norwich had been pushing him to find someone with a science background to help them start a science program. So he told me about them. I met them. It all sounded very exciting. They realized that hands-on science was the important thing. And so that's, they hired me at Norwich to work with these two people. And it was very exciting. It was a wonderful curriculum development experience. And so we moved to Norwich and have been here ever since.
So there you are, an early career teacher who's taking on a leadership project within a school. It seems like a really big jump to then take on this project, this teacher training project that's a little bit off the map of what you had been doing up to that point. What inspired you to make that leap?
Well, I never thought of it really that way. It just sort of happened. You know, I went to Norwich to teach science, and then one thing led to another. But I've always thought of myself as a teacher, not a initiator of programs or anything like that. It just sort of happened, you know.
Well, it seems to me it happened more than one time about you.
It did. It did. That seems to have been the way I spent my life.
So from that initial germ of an idea, tell me a little bit about how the program took shape and developed.
Well, there were several of us who worked on it. I didn't, this was not my idea. But you know, educators love to talk to educators and talk about needs and things like that, and that's always been fun. There were three of us who, and the federal government was offering money to encourage more people to go into education, and invited grants and proposals and things like that. There were three of us who worked together writing proposals during the period starting in the mid-60s. And first of all, we got, going back just a little bit, this was when a lot of the new science programs developed. And Leonard Reese particularly was associated with a lot of those. He got NSF, National Science Foundation grant money for us, and we worked on that. And then we began to generalize more and more, especially with the federal government offering money for teacher programs. And three of us, my old friend who's now deceased, Audrey Logan, came from Meriden, and she'd been working in schools and particularly in the library. And then Frank Toms, whom I think you may have met, and who now lives in Mexico. But the three of us became the proposal writers. Every time there was a new federal program announced, we would write a proposal. We'd read with the guidelines and we'd write a proposal. And I don't remember us ever being turned down. We always got money, and therefore the UVEI as a name didn't emerge and go to get focused on that until much later. But we ran some kind of a teacher training program in which we could offer stipends to the participants, which was important. And we ran, the name always changed every year according to where we got the money. We were NEPT one year, we were ESEA one year, we were the one thing after another. And we just used that name. And this went on for, 4 or 5 years. We always were approved, and that was very nice.
That's a nice way to get started.
It's a nice way to get started, yeah.
So looking back on the program in those years, what do you feel like the core element of the program was, or what set it apart or made it different from other ways of training teachers?
I think that's an important, really important question. I think it was the hands-on, it was the doing of things. I'd had the privilege of going to a teacher training program in the greater Boston area that was established by a person named Catherine Taylor, who was a personal friend, and it was a wonderful program. She was one of my primary mentors in life, and she started the program, and at that time you became an apprentice to an experienced mentor teacher. And and you were working in that person's classroom all year long and doing. You took more and more, assumed more and more responsibility. And I think it's the hands-on doing and being in the classroom which is really important. And that still is an important essence of UVEI and what we do. You become an apprentice teacher or an intern teacher, and you learn by doing. And I think I continue to feel, even at my ripe old age, that is an important. You can't read about how to teach. You can't take classes in it. You can learn by doing.
Now, you had an opportunity that many founding leaders don't have, which was after a more than 15-year hiatus of you doing other things, you returned and re-engaged with UVEI, joining the board, becoming the board chair, eventually becoming the interim director again.
Yeah.
I'm interested to know, what was that like coming back to UVEI after being away? How had things changed?
Well, of course, it had grown a lot. The early days, we didn't have a lot of people, always. I don't think we ever had more than 10 people at a time, usually a smaller group than that. But a lot of things, we had a better space to operate in, and the money was certainly helpful. And it had grown, it had matured, and of course later, and much later, we were able to offer degrees, and which we never had before, and so that was important.
So one of the challenges that people say sometimes about apprenticeship programs is about, okay, fine, teachers have rich experiences, but how do we know at the end that they have the skills that they need, that they can teach? And I'm curious to know what you think about how UVI over time responded to that question.
One of the things that really impressed me was how, in a sense, focused and fine-tuned the idea of competence had become. We felt that our apprentice teachers in the early days, we wanted them to be competent teachers, but when I came back and became the interim director, we had really focused on that. We now have, 10 or 12 specific competencies that we look for when we certify a teacher. And that fine-tuning of competencies I find fascinating. And that was brand new to me when I was interim director, to really understand what you look for to determine what are the indicators that we as members of the staff were looking for. Professionalism, knowledge of subject matter, understanding of learning styles of the students, and all of that kind of thing. That's much more sophisticated than we were looking for, understanding, and so that was exciting.
So you remain very involved in UVEI right up to this day. You're a emeritus board member, you're an advisor to the staff and faculty and to me. When you look at UVEI today, what are some of the things that you notice or that excite you?
Well, of course, the first thing that you have achieved in recent years is that we can now offer actually a degree, a master's degree. And we should have been able, it would have been nice to do that right along, but we were not ready. And there's still aspects of that concern me. I think you may remember that I have always felt very strongly that no one should get a master's degree in education until they really have been in charge of a classroom for a whole year and know the whole experience. It's very scary when a beginning teacher faces a whole classroom of students, and you realize what is involved in giving them an exciting learning experience for a whole year. in what discipline. You have to know a lot about your disciplines and everything like that. You have to understand learning styles. You have to understand how to create an environment in which there is not chaos in the classroom, which there can be with a group of kids, in which you just can establish a learning style, in which you can encourage kids to ask more questions. And that's not easy, but if real learning is going to take place, you hope that students will get more and more intrigued in the subject matter and develop questions and dig deeper themselves. And that's difficult.
So if you and I could go down to Concord or up to Montpelier and tell them, here's how the career trajectory of teachers should be structured, how would you advise that it should be?
Well, I think I'd start out by saying that everyone learns differently, letting them discover, working one-to-one or with a very small group of children and learning how different children respond to that. There's another ingredient that I think is really important, and that is that the teacher gets excited himself or herself and becomes quite passionate about the importance of another generation. And then you need to find out what approximately what age range of students can really absorb different aspects of a discipline. I think that a good, solid background in the subject matter itself is really, really important. That was one of the things that impressed me so much when I worked with those two science professors from Dartmouth. One was a physicist and a brilliant one. One was a biologist and a brilliant one, and a long time interest in good education, and he was one of Norwich's early town fathers. And both of them felt so strongly about the importance of every child in Norwich really grasping and understanding and appreciation of those two separate disciplines. And that was, I think that's still true. I think passion for what you want to communicate to the next generation is really important.
One of the emerging projects at UVEI is about teacher leadership, and in particular, helping develop teachers to coach or mentor other teachers. And that's something you've expressed interest in. And I'd love to know more about what about that project is interesting to you.
Oh yeah, I'm so glad you mentioned that, because for some time I felt that we haven't done well by our mentors. I think if you can become a good mentor, it's a big professional step up as a teacher. I think the experience of trying to teach another person how to teach with the passion that you have as a mentor is not something that happens naturally. It takes time. A good teacher is focused completely on the kids in the class and helping them learn. And then if at the same time you're trying to help another teacher develop that skill, it takes time. In many ways, it detracts you from your immediate charge, which is the children. So it's another professional step. I think that as in the medical profession, great doctors want to train the younger generation of doctors, and that's one of the reasons why doctors in hospitals do rounds, is so that the resident doctors and interns can get a sense of how of how they're dealing with patients and getting all the background. And I think we have something to learn from that respect. UVEI, we operated it on a financial shoestring for so long. We never had money to pay mentor teachers. When I was on the board, we found somebody who was a personal friend of mine, and he had money to give away, and he gave us money, which he asked me, one of the things, where are the needs in that project you work on at home? He used to say to me, I'd like to help you do that, which was wonderful. And he always gave us money without our having had time to think through how to use it well, you know. I've always regretted that, but he was on track in terms of helping us to deal with the mentors. If you'd been there, if you'd been at UVEI at that time, you would have figured it out. Together we would have developed a mentor program. But I didn't do it well at that time. I think you can still give, now that we can give a degree, I hope that you'll start giving academic credit for someone who is a really good mentor. And maybe develop a program in which we help mentors learn how to be good mentors, and have teachers aspire to that, because I think it can be a big important professional step for them. Not only that they should be earning more money, and the school district, of course, ideally would be paying for that, but we need to help them get there.
So you started UVEI with this vision or this dream of what it could be. When you look at UVEI today, what elements of that original vision do you see?
Well, one of the things I love is that you know so much about how to really work with would-be teachers and how to help them develop specific skills. You know what you're doing. I didn't know what I was doing. I was just dreaming. And that's one of the things which is great, that I do think this is the time when you have to analyze things and understand what goes into the learning process. And you're able to do that because you've spent a lot more time developing the background than I did. I'm always a little bit embarrassed to tell you that I haven't yet had a regular education course in my life. One of the reasons, going back to the really early days, one of the reasons that we felt it was important to have an alternative program is because I used to know a lot of people who said that they'd always wanted to teach, and they liked working with students, and I knew that they knew a lot about their subject matter, and I thought they would have been wonderful teachers. And then they start talking about how they liked kids, and I'd watch them with their own children. And I thought, you know, there's got to be, they said I'd never go to take education courses because I've heard such terrible things about them. And, you know, schools of education didn't have a very good reputation at that time. And still, regular ones still don't, I think. But I've never had a course in education. I'm always a little embarrassed to say that, but there were no programs in which you learned by doing. And I continue to feel that that's important. But there's also a lot you can learn, and now you know much more about that.
Well, it seems to me that your career in life was an advanced course in education, and the things you're saying about UVEI and about me are very kind. I hope that we keep some of that spirit of we need to be doing things a little bit beyond or past what we just know or understand or can analyze, because it's that sense of adventure and experimentation that really got us to this point.
And I think you've got that in your mind. And you know, Paige, I think that I remember one of the first things when I read what you'd done and everything like that, I was on the search committee to find you, as you may remember. And I was intrigued by your resume because you'd done so many different things. And then we asked you to come and meet us and all that. And I think one of the things I said to you at that time, Paige, you need to know that UVEI has always been a little bit subversive. And you laughed and you said something about, yes, you liked that. And so I just knew at that time you were the right person.
Well, I have that quote from you posted above my desk as a reminder. So, final question. Looking ahead a little bit, when you look at the teaching profession and the state of education, what are some things that you feel hopeful about?
Well, I think the country is increasingly concerned about and recognizing education. Unfortunately, the way that is expressed is not always the way we'd like it to be, but I certainly, teacher salaries are improving all the time. There are some districts which have the resources to pay teachers a lot better than they've ever been before. I think, of course, that education is so important that the teachers should be a highly respected profession. Doctors are, professors at college are, but it's the early years that really make the difference in the attitude towards that children develop towards learning. And I think we're making progress. I'd like to see teachers paid a lot better. But again, we're making progress in that area, and I hope that becoming a teacher will be regarded by the country as a whole as being respected, like being a lawyer, being a physician, and that it will be recognized. We're on our way. We're doing better, and that's hopeful.
Let's keep working towards that.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much. This has been great.
Well, it's been fun talking to you. Thanks a lot.